Perinatal mental health is an important topic that really does need to be discussed more. We're slowly increasing our awareness and having open conversations around postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and more. Join me this week as I sit down with therapist Nicola Crawley and we talk about postpartum anxiety, depression, and how to support yourself and others if you're experiencing symptoms of it. Hi, I'm Adrienne Irizarry. I'm an East Asian medicine practitioner who is passionate about women's health and helping women to live their best lives. My goal is to put you in the driver's seat of your health, offering holistic solutions for a symptom-free life. Statements made in this program are for educational purposes only and not intended as a substitution for medical consultation or advice. We do not claim to diagnose, treat, or cure any diseases. This podcast is inclusive and welcomes all gender identities. The focus of the program is on biological function, and we will use the term women throughout, but it is referencing physiological and social challenges for biology, not identity. Come as you are, I am happy you're here and welcome all performances of identity. I hope you find something helpful in this show. Welcome back to another episode of the Reproductive Rebel podcast. I am overjoyed to talk about a very important topic today, and I would love to welcome my guest, Nicola Crawley. Welcome to the show, Nicola.
Hi, Adrienne. Thank you for having me.
So Nicola reached out to the show and shared a really important story, one that I've wanted to share on this podcast for quite a while. So I am going to turn the mic over to you, Nicola. Tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you. So, yeah, as you said, I'm Nicola Crawley and I have a company called Inner Belief. Prior to that, I was in the corporate world for many years. And because of what happened in my life in relation to the topic that we're going to talk about today around peri and postnatal depression, I chose to leave that career, retrain and support women who were going through what I went through and to try and prevent people from going through that.
That's so beautiful. So many of us change our careers. I worked in the corporate world at one time, and it just was not aligned in so many ways. I didn't feel like I was contributing at a heartfelt way to the world. And so many of us move out of that rat race kind of pace into things that are aligned with our soul
Yeah.
because of lived experience. So share with us a little bit about your journey to doing the work that you do now.
Okay. So my journey, I guess, started back in 2002, which I can't believe was 23 years ago. And in November of that year, I had my eldest son. Pregnancy was okay. It was a little bit difficult. I had early stages of preeclampsia. Towards the later stages of the pregnancy, I was induced and I gave birth to my very healthy 9 pound 12 baby boy. And almost immediately, I just felt this complete feeling of overwhelm and absolute responsibility that this person in front of me was 100% reliant on myself and my husband and could do nothing for himself. And then the love that I felt for him, I can only describe it as being too big for my body. It just felt like it was so much bigger than me. What that then translated into was me having this abject fear that he was going to die. I was absolutely convinced that because he was there and he was so precious, that he was going to get taken away from me. And that gradually became worse and worse, even though I had a loving husband, loving family. We have health visitors in the UK. So when we leave the maternity hospital, we're seen by a midwife for a couple of weeks, and then a health visitor comes in. And she did a score that's called the Edinburgh score, and it's to assess for postnatal depression. And she said if you scored, I think it was greater than 12, then you were into the realms of postnatal depression and I scored 18. And I couldn't remember the time where I'd been happy when she was doing the test. How that then transpired was that I became convinced, and it sounds crazy saying it to you now, but I became convinced that the coat that was hung on the back of my bedroom door, if I removed that coat, that my son would die. There was absolutely clear connection that you just could not convince me otherwise of. I was seeing a psychologist at the time, and he said, please try and just take that down, even if it's for a split second, because there is no correlation between these two things. So I think I moved it maybe just a couple of centimeters. I didn't lift it off because that was too scary. I just moved it. And then I sat all night watching him to
Mm.
make sure he didn't die, just staring at him. I went back to see the psychologist a couple of days later. And I think this is one reason that I wanted to get into doing the therapy that I do, because what he said could have sent me down a complete spiral. He said, did you remove the coat? And I said, only a little bit. He said, is your son still alive? And I said, yeah. And he said, oh, thank God for that. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I had a client, a lady, who was convinced that if she took a silver bangle off her wrist, boyfriend would die. And she did, and he was killed in a car accident.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
So to me, that just reinforced in my mental state that what had happened when I took that coat was a fluke. I'd just been lucky, and that this connection was still there.
Oh.
So I left that psychologist and started to look into other forms of therapy. And that's where I came across things like hypnotherapy at this point. I gradually began to get better. I was still carrying on working in the corporate world, and there's a 7 year age gap between my two boys because myself and my husband wanted to make sure that I was well. And I was well, and I got pregnant again in late 2009. Within 6 weeks, I was feeling amazing, but within 6 weeks, I spiraled again. And I can only describe it as a breakdown. I was just, I was suicidal. I had a suicide note in my car when I was driving to an appointment. And I just thought, because I tried, in my head, I've tried everything. And then I was thinking, my husband doesn't need to go through this again. It's not fair on my 7 year old son. I'm just a burden to people. And I just couldn't see a way out. Everything just felt black and completely overwhelming. And some people describe depression as being like a black dog that just appears. I described it as being like a black blanket that just completely smothered me. And I couldn't feel, see any of the senses to get out of it. And I went for therapy, and I had something called timeline therapy, which is a form of neuro-linguistic programming. And I came out of there after 2 sessions, and my husband said, I've got my wife back. And that completely saved my life. There is no two ways about it. And from that, I was like, wow, this has just been revolutionary for me. I need to find a way that I can stop other people experiencing what I did. So I retrained in that. And then I was given an opportunity because I was at director level. I could leave that and start my own business with some money behind me. So I did that. And it was only 2 years ago, at the age of 49, that I was diagnosed with ADHD and autism. And what I've since found out is that I was reading something only the other day that said that 30% of women who have not got any kind of neurodivergence will most likely experience some form of postnatal depression. That doubles to 60% when you put neurodivergence in the mix. So I can now see those feelings of overwhelm, those feelings of just everything being too much, the overthinking, the guilt was magnified from the feelings of postnatal depression and ADHD.
Wow. Oh my
Mm.
goodness, there's so much to unpack here. Number one, I just want to witness you and say thank you so much for sharing such a vulnerable story, because there are so many people who suffer in silence with varying levels of postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. I can say that with my first child, I was a little more on the depressive side of things, but I was in a set of circumstances where I didn't have a choice. I kind of had to soldier through.
Yeah.
And I had a really hard time getting out of bed, and I had a really hard time, like, taking care of her was easy,
Mm,
because she was like the light of my life.
yeah.
And that was the only candle that I had at that time that was giving any light to my life.
Mm,
And with my son, I was very surprised because of my fertility journey to bring him into the world. Like getting pregnant with him was such a miracle. And my pregnancy with him was beautiful. I had the home birth that I wanted to have. And not long after I gave birth to him, the anxiety
mm,
began.
yeah.
And it was so intense that I would hold him against my chest and I would press myself against the wall to walk down the stairs
Yeah.
because I could just see so vividly in my mind both of us falling down the stairs or something like that, and it felt so irrational. And yet the little things like other people holding him or you know other people having normal interactions with him, I can
Mm,
feel like my chest tighten. And
mm,
at the time of this recording, he's almost 7 months old now, and I still have a little bit of that. It's hard to describe to people who haven't experienced it. So I am really grateful for you sharing your story. And for those who are listening who have experienced it and either didn't realize that's what it was, like there's been more conversation openly, I feel like, in the last few years about it, but it's very recent that people
yeah.
are being more open around having this kind of experience.
I still class it as being one of the biggest taboos. I think since the pandemic, because that's now the new way that we measure time, but since the pandemic, well, most people are starting to appreciate mental health issues and we feel more able to talk about them. But still, postnatal, postpartum depression is a taboo because, like you were just describing there, you'd been trying so long for this baby and it was a miracle that you came along. So you are expected by society to feel great and to be so grateful and the perfect mum. And then I think what we have now that we didn't have back in 2002 and 2003 when I first experienced it is social media,
Mm.
and people can present this picture of being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, having the perfect child. And when you're in the throes of depression, what you don't realize is that is a single snapshot of a second in time. And it could be utter chaos and devastation going on around them. So I think there's a lot of pressure now on new mums to have this perfect life. And unfortunately, it just isn't like that for a lot of people.
I mean, those first few weeks after you give birth are messy any way you look at it. Whether you're experiencing postpartum anxiety or depression, or in some cases, postpartum psychosis, like
Yeah.
it's messy under the best of circumstances. You're trying to figure out your baby's new rhythm. The third day after you give birth, you have one of the biggest hormonal shifts of your entire
Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
and your milk comes in. But like, I remember the day that my milk came in, I felt like everything that my family needed, because I have a blended family. My older two were from my husband's previous marriage, and my daughter, who's 13 and a half now, was from my previous marriage. So this was our first baby together.
Mm,
And like I felt like all of the teenagers came at me all at once and they all needed things and dad needed things, and I was trying to nurse the baby and I was having a little bit of a hard time with like I wasn't sure if I was already experiencing
mm,
some early mastitis signs because
yeah.
like everything burned. So like I was so focused on that, and then everybody was coming at me all at once and I felt like I was going to snap
Yeah.
because it just was so overwhelming and so much pressure all at once. And nobody could understand, even when I tried to explain. My body is tired, my emotions are tired,
Mm,
and I'm trying to do this thing. And when milk comes in, it's just such a huge shift. And
yeah.
when that little pocket of time isn't honored, it's kind of like the beginning of a snowball that starts to
Exactly.
roll down the hill.
Yeah, exactly. And I think way back when, I know when I was born, mums were encouraged to stay in hospital for a week, and the midwives came and took the babies away at night so that mums could get a restful sleep. And that is completely flipped on its head now. And we're encouraged to leave hospital as soon as possible. And we're just kind of, I know that in the UK, the NHS service that we have is completely stretched at the moment. So people who work in there, the medical staff, just haven't necessarily got the time to provide the support that they want to provide. And breastfeeding was something that contributed to my trigger with my eldest because we managed one successful breastfeed. And then I was just really struggling to get him to latch on for the next one. And the midwives came in to help, and I was calling them back because it just wasn't happening. And he was really hungry and was crying. And like you said, you're exhausted. My labor had been 36 hours. I was exhausted by this point and in the hospital on my own with him in the middle of the night. And I actually went to the nursery station and asked for a bottle. But that hospital had just been awarded a breastfeeding award. So their focus was you have to breastfeed, you have to breastfeed. And when I went back again and asked for a bottle because he'd not fed for ages by this point, they just gave me such a look. I can still remember it. And I felt so small. And that contributed to these feelings of failure and guilt. And I guess the belief that I was doing something so fundamentally wrong that was going to damage his health as well. So yeah, it's kind of like this perfect cocktail in all the right conditions, really, for feeling so vulnerable.
Well, and breastfeeding isn't second nature,
Yeah,
especially when it's your first. Like, I had no idea with my first that I had inverted nipples. I had
yeah,
never had issues with my nipples showing through my shirt, which I was
mm,
so grateful for because I had friends that would get teased about it. But little did I know, fast forward when I was 27 years old and I had given birth to my first child and I was trying to breastfeed said child, that this was a problem.
yeah, yeah,
It was no longer a blessing, it was a problem. And
yeah,
so, nipple shields and, like, I didn't have any of that stuff, and I'm
mm,
so
mm,
grateful that I had a home birth midwife that was equipped and able to, like, tell me that it was actually an anatomical thing. It
mm,
wasn't me. But then also because my daughter had been in the birth canal for so long, because I was in labor 15 and a half hours with her, but her neck tipped, so, like, the cone wasn't right on the top of her head, it was, like, off to the side, and at the time, I didn't know anything about craniosacral massage or chiropractic. I really didn't know much about chiropractic work. I had a little bit of adjustment work done on my neck, and it was kind of traumatizing. I really didn't know what I know now about how, adjustments can help with the latch and all of those types of things, and I had a beautiful network of practitioners that helped support my son in those early days and help support me in those early days this time because I know what I know now. But
yeah,
at the time, I felt like a failure because my
mm,
daughter was hungry. I couldn't get her to latch. Then I had to wear these shields, and she would latch and she would start to suckle and she would break away and she would scream because her
mm,
jaw wasn't properly
mm,
aligned and her head bones needed to be moved into proper alignment. So she started to lose weight. And it was,
right,
I don't know, maybe 9 days into
mm,
her being earthside that the midwife was like, "Have you tried craniosacral?" And I was like, "What the heck is that?" And
mm,
she hooked me up with an incredible practitioner and one adjustment. And I watched my daughter, like, she barely touched my daughter, and my daughter, like, took this big breath in, and I expected her to start to scream.
mhm,
And she sighed, and her whole body, like, relaxed into the table. And I started to cry because I'm like, this poor kid has been in pain. Like, the
mm,
fact that she is so relaxed now, she's been in pain. And then I felt like a failure, right?
yeah,
Like, there's so many things in that early stage of motherhood, whether you've done it once or you've done it 3 times, 4 times, it doesn't
mm,
matter. Like, every child is a little bit different.
mm,
Their circumstances of birth are different. And, you may not have any issues with one, but then you may with another. I had a client who recently shared with me that she ended up having to pump and bottle feed, and then just moved completely into bottle feeding her kids because she had intense rage when she would
Oh,
let down. So,
wow.
yeah. So, like, there are so many emotions and symptoms that can come
Mm.
along with healthy breastfeeding. It's hard for,
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard under normal circumstances. And then add
Mhm.
the hormonal changes and what's happening in your story, in your frame of reference at that time, that all contribute heavily to how we internalize those messages and the filter that
Exactly.
we run them through.
Yeah, and that's absolutely it. It's those filters and those beliefs that we create about ourselves that then feed the narrative for the rest of the time until we're able to stop and realize that that's not true. It's a belief that's not true. But it's hard because, like you said before, you're in the depths of exhaustion and attention, everybody focused on you as well, and this baby needing you. That it's hard to get that clarity of mind for any length of time, let alone the time that you need to process and work through the emotions and the thoughts that you're having.
Absolutely. And now a break from our conversation for a partnership message. You've been told to hustle, grind, wake up early, and do more. But here's the truth: rest is the most productive thing you can do. And the right kind of rest starts with Sia Silk Sleep Mask, your new sleep sanctuary. I've tried so many sleep masks, and I thought I just had to deal with the discomfort of slipping straps and light still getting through. But then I found this one, and I'm never going back. Made of 100% mulberry silk, it's the only mask that creates total blackout with its comfortable, oversized eye cups that don't smush my lashes while feeling weightless on my face. My sleep, next level. This isn't just a sleep mask, it's an investment in your nervous system. Sia Silk is a women owned small business committed to high quality and sustainable luxury. Check out the show notes for the link to grab yours and rest like you mean it. And now, back to the show. One of the things that you mentioned in our screening call prior to this recording was, but I was a great mom because my child was completely taken care of. It was
Yeah,
me. You want to
yeah,
elaborate a little bit on that? Because that really stuck out to me.
yeah. I think at the time, if you'd have asked me, would I have said that I was a great mum? Probably not, because I was this absolute failure. But when I look back, he was never ever in any danger. He was smothered with affection, if anything. He was clean, he was washed, he was fed, he was, as you said earlier, he was the center of my world. And so he was so well looked after. And I look back at myself, and like you just said, it was a struggle to get out of bed. I didn't wash, didn't clean my teeth, didn't wash my hair, wasn't really bothered about what I was wearing. I didn't want to speak to people, didn't want to be around people. So the only person who was neglected in this whole scenario was me. And it wasn't neglect through not having the support of the people around me. It's just they could encourage me all they wanted, but I had to focus on this person and really not care, not have the energy or, like I said before, the mind space to think about me and what was right for me and have a little bit of self care. I think that's another really important message because in the beginnings of motherhood, we do neglect self care because we are focused on everything else that's happening. And it's probably one of the most critical things, but it adds to the guilt because we feel so guilty for taking the time away to look after ourselves. And I hear people saying, oh, my baby's only 4 weeks old. I can't leave them with somebody else for an hour. But you can't because it's important. It's important that you step away because then you can come back with the full cup, if you like, and continue to pour from that rather than trying to be on the brink of exhaustion and do your very best. So yeah, I think it's remembering and being able to just stop and think about what am I doing that's actually right? What am I doing that's good? What can I see that demonstrates to me and tries to break through those beliefs that I have? a negative to demonstrate that I am a good mum. And I can look back and see that now. And I think it's amazing as your children get older and they reinforce that and tell you that you are. On some days, I mean, the youngest is a teenager, so there's days where I'm not at all the worst person in the world.
I
But
resonate with that.
yeah, but underneath it all, then yeah, absolutely, I'm proud of my children and the relationship that we have.
Oh, I love that. I like what you said about being able to pour into your cup because it does feel selfish. And there are people who question that whole concept of put your own oxygen mask on first before you help others on an airplane. And I've heard people be like, that's so not right. And it's like, well, but you can't do the most to help other people if you run out of air.
Yeah,
And I thought about this a lot in the early days with my son because I remember with my daughter, I would literally have a heart attack while I was in the shower for the 5 minutes that I dared step in
yeah,
there and degrease myself
yeah.
and change to a fresh pair of pajamas. Like
Wow.
it was just like, oh my gosh, how could I possibly do that? And I had to be really intentional about it with my son though too. And it felt better because like when I was doing this the first time, it was really just me and her.
Mm,
So, and for some reason it didn't occur to me little things like you can actually bring the seat of the swing into the bathroom with you, Adrian. You can buckle
mm.
her in. So if you're afraid, you can make it a game and peer out of the shower curtain at her. And you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, because I didn't have the help at home. This time I had more help and more people around me, which was
mm,
helpful, but I still would have so much anxiety while I was taking a shower. It's
yeah,
getting better, but like I said, I'm almost 7 months postpartum. I'm still having some of those feelings. Like when I would try to drive a car in the
yeah,
first few weeks after, when I say first few weeks after, I think I was almost to the end of the 3rd month before I actually dared to drive a car. And the entire time I was like white knuckles on the
mm,
steering wheel because he was in the back.
mm.
And just getting there, like I don't know if I breathed. I drove 10 minutes. Like
Well, I
that's
hope you
all it
did.
was. And it was like it was so stressful.
Yeah,
So when you work with people who experience these kinds of emotional expressions, because some of it is being driven by hormones, and as an herbalist I also believe that some of it is being driven by body constitution. So there's a lack of something, whether it's
yeah.
the movement of chi and blood or the nourishment of chi and blood. And I know that's why anxiety is presenting for me because of my age and the fact that I have celiac. So I know that's a piece of it. But how long do you typically see people experience these kinds of symptoms after they've had a baby?
So we're coming back to the age-old saying of how long is a piece of string. And I wanted to say that to you because you just said he's 7 months and I'm still experiencing this. And I said at the beginning, there's a 7 year age gap between my children to make sure that I was okay. Because for quite a bit of it, I was better, but I wasn't okay. It took a lot of work over that time before I started to learn the skills that I have now. So I think for most people who come to see me, we see an improvement within the first 4 to 5 sessions. And then we build on that and build on that. And it's normally about 3 months. And then they feel like they've got the toolkit that they need. I don't want to say that they've not got the postpartum depression anymore, but what they've got is a toolkit so that they can recognize things, they can manage, got different strategies for coping with things, for managing the anxiety around things like breathing techniques. We look at things around, we've mentioned it earlier, the limiting beliefs and removing those limiting beliefs because when they start to get into your brain, they become truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we're working with is the unconscious mind or the subconscious, whichever you want to call it, and that doesn't know the difference between fact and fiction. So whatever you're telling it is what it believes, which can work really well if we're putting loads of positive stuff in there. But when we're talking, I'm a failure, I'm a rubbish mum, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. That's what it starts to believe. So we've got to kind of shift that mindset into focusing on what is the truth here? What is the actual truth? What do you have proof of that's the truth rather than what your mind is telling itself? And that's becoming your version of the truth.
I love that. It's kind of like that idea of it takes 21 days to build a habit. Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love that. So I know you have more than just therapy in your toolkit. So
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit about how you weave all of your skill sets into sessions with your clients?
Yeah. So I'm a reflexologist, a hypnotherapist, and a master NLP practitioner. So I will have a consultation with that person and work out which bits of which are going to work for them. Because sometimes they may come in and go, I don't want reflexology. It's not going to benefit me, but they don't really understand what it is.
Mhm.
So it's good to have those conversations and then explain, you know what, reflexology helps with postpartum depression as well, because what it does is it encourages the body to heal itself. So working the different reflexes on the feet is not just working physical parts of the body, but it's working things like the endocrine system that's responsible for the hormones, and it's working the nervous system. So if we can start to sedate those and bring those into balance, then you're dealing with some of the chemical side of things that you were talking about earlier. And then we'll bring in a little bit of hypnosis, some NLP. The NLP comes in with the limiting beliefs, a lot with the coping strategies. We'll look at breathing techniques, and people will say to me, how can I focus on my breathing when literally my breathing is like this? And the more I focus on it, then the less I can do it. None of it is rocket science, but really simple techniques like the hand technique, where you start at the bottom of the base of your thumb and you breathe in and you follow your finger round. You draw a line around each finger, breathing in as you're going up, breathing out as you're going down. And sometimes just I say to people to write down those techniques that we've worked through, write them down and have them somewhere to hand at all times. Because when you're in the midst of feeling something, if you start to feel that anxiety come through again, you're not thinking straight. So
Mhm.
you don't know what you can do to bring it back down again. And then that just exacerbates it. So yeah, we blend lots of things together like that so that we're looking at the holistic approach, the mind, the body, and the spirit side of things.
I love that. So what she just said that you see now why I absolutely had to have her on the show. She's not just looking at, and I'm not faulting the traditional Western medical model where your mind gets put in one box and your ovaries are put in a box. And, the medical system tends to silo us as individuals, and there's a different specialist for different parts of the body. I love Nicola's approach because she is taking into consideration that, yes, there's a physiological reason why some of this is happening, but she's also working the energetic piece as well as providing these tools that people can go home with, because this is where, like, when people know that they don't feel normal or quote unquote normal, right?
Mhm.
Not normal for them, they tend to sit in Dr. Google.
Yeah,
And that is so not productive.
yeah. Not at all. Not at all. I think for some people, this mind body connection can be a bit difficult to get your head around.
Yeah.
Um, the fact that the mind and what we think can have an impact on our body. But I give an example of if you do something and it's embarrassing, you don't then think, oh, I must make my cheeks go red. It just happens automatically. That's how strong the connection is. And if you hear something funny, you don't think, widen my mouth and make a funny noise from it. We just laugh. So, yeah, just like dancing. So, this is how powerful that connection is on a really basic level. So, we can see why, when we're feeling all these feelings inside, that sometimes it's coming from the thought processes that are going on in the mind and the beliefs that we've got there.
Oh, I love that. That's the angle I work with my clients from.
Mm.
And that's one thing I would have to say that in the last few years of my work with people in my practice is that I have started shifting more towards the focus being on the emotional body, because of how we end up with these physical symptoms. I mean, Chinese medicine recognizes that the spirit, the mind, all of these
mm,
things are connected anyway, which is one of the reasons why I love it. But I have found that particularly for women, the stories that we tell ourselves, I did an episode a couple of seasons ago about the inner critic, and that the
mm,
inner critic can really be not only a rude jerk that you're locked into the box with,
mm.
but can have such a powerful impact on how your physical body presents itself. And
Yeah,
what you just said is a beautiful explanation of why that is.
yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think we say things to ourselves that we would never dream of
Mhm.
saying to anybody else. The stuff that I said to myself when I was in the depths of that postpartum depression and anxiety was vile,
Mm.
really. And if somebody said that to somebody that I loved, I wouldn't stand for it. But I think that's the point. At that point, you don't love yourself.
Mhm.
So it's easy. And then that just makes it easier for that voice to get louder and louder.
Yes, absolutely. So, just for people who may be at the stage of, I know I don't feel like myself, but I don't know what I'm
Mm.
feeling other than the fact that I don't feel like myself. Would you be able to explain a little bit about how postpartum depression presents, how postpartum psychosis presents, and postpartum anxiety?
Yeah. And I think for me, because the bit with the coat on the door was classed as psychosis. And I don't think that you would recognize that in yours
Mhm.
because that's your truth. So there isn't really a wake up call for that one. In my head, that's more about other people recognizing that around you. But the depression and the anxiety, the depression is just this feeling of, I've got this baby that I wanted, that I should be happy about. Or maybe in some cases, I understand that it might be a shock or it might not be the ideal time for you, but still, you feeling like you've got no drive to do anything. You don't perhaps want to eat. You can't sleep because thoughts are racing through your mind. And like I was saying before, even the most basic principles of self-care that like you at that point, I'd done that for 27, 28 years, just go. And you just don't care about yourself. Everything just, you feel like you're in a bit of a blinkered black tunnel, I think. And the anxiety, it can be anxiety about perhaps you're not bonding with your child and not feeling the feelings that you think you should be having, or you're potentially overly concerned about your child in the same way that you and I have just described, and perhaps feeling like there may be harm to the child, in which case you need to seek immediate help. But just, I think the important thing is to just take 5 minutes for yourself each day in those initial days, if you can, and just sit and think, how am I feeling? What positive can I get from today? And if the answer is none, then that gives you a wake up call. But what positive can I get? And what have I done well? What have I not done well? And if the scales are out of kilter with that, then that tends to give you an indication of where your head might be at.
Oh, that's beautiful. So, for anybody who heard this checklist, I would highly encourage you to write it down. Take a couple minutes and write these things down, because then you can kind of look at it over time
Mm,
and go, okay, I'm waking up more days than not feeling this way.
mm.
And it will help inform a discussion with a professional.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you can, because it can feel, I remember when I was having the therapy when I was pregnant with my second child, and my therapist said, think of a time when you were really happy. And I said, I've never been happy in my life. And by this point, I was 35. Now I think back, well, there must have been some points where you were happy. Definitely, if there were. But I couldn't think of any because everything just seemed to be covered in this black blanket. And I think sometimes if you're checking in on your emotions and your feelings, you can see little glimmers of light that you may have forgotten about because as humans, we're programmed to focus on the negative. So we can start to see these little glimmers that could perhaps spur you on that little bit, encourage you a little bit, maybe help you to see the fact that you're doing a good job when you might not feel that sometimes.
Beautiful. So, if you were to leave our audience with final thoughts around this topic, what would those be?
My thoughts on this are, and it kind of ties back in with what we've said earlier, that if you are doing your best, your baby is being fed, clothed, bathed, you are absolutely good enough. And it's recognizing that you are good enough and taking those moments to see that and allowing yourself to see that despite the noise around you and the noise in your head. Take those moments and recognize that you are good enough, more than good enough.
Thank you for that. I think that there are definitely people listening that need to hear exactly that.
Yeah.
So if members of our audience are looking to reach out to you, how can they get a hold of you?
So my website is inner-belief.co.uk, and you can message me at hello@inner-belief.co.uk, and I will share with you the links to my socials where people can get hold of me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. We'll have all of that information in the show notes. Thank you again so much for sharing your story. I hope our conversation can be really helpful and nourishing for people who are experiencing these symptoms and either feel alone in what they're experiencing or realize that there are other people that can support and nourish them in ways that it might be hard for them to see themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share my story.
Thank you. And until next time, everybody. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Reproductive Rebel. Reproductive Rebel is recorded by certified peri-steam hydrotherapist and acutonics practitioner, herbalist, and Chinese nutritional therapist Adrienne Irizarry of Moon Essence LLC. If you are interested in setting up an appointment for one-on-one support, ordering from our store, or checking out our course offerings, visit our website at moonessence.life. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and get insider information on upcoming events and offerings. Join the conversation. Like and follow us at Moon Essence Me on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Your voices make this program possible. Thank you all for your continued support.